Clara Benson gripped the reins of her horse, Daisy, as the late afternoon sun hid behind thick clouds. The narrow trail along Willow Creek had always seemed peaceful, but today it carried an uneasy hush. She tightened her shawl against the rising wind, glancing at the basket of supplies tied securely behind her. Schoolbooks, candles, and food for the town's small church pressed against her side, a mission of faith she would not neglect even in the unsettled weather. By the time she reached the creek, the first drops of rain were falling, sharp and cold. Within minutes, the sky opened and a downpour drenched the trail. Mud threatened to swallow her boots, and the horse skittered nervously on the slippery path. Clara's heart raced. She knew the creek could swell quickly after a storm, and crossing it alone in this weather would be dangerous. Just as she began to consider turning back, a flash of lightning illuminated a small cabin tucked among the willows on the opposite bank. Smoke curled from its chimney, promising warmth and shelter. Clara's prayer was quiet but urgent. "Lord, please guide me safely." The ground was slick, but Daisy followed Clara's lead as she scrambled to the cabin. She didn't notice the figure standing in the doorway until he stepped forward, boots crunching against the wet earth. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face softened by kind eyes, he carried an air of authority tempered with caution. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he called over the roar of the rain. "The creek's rising fast." Clara swallowed, embarrassed but relieved. I didn't know where else to go. The trail became unsafe." He nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. "Name's Caleb Turner. You can stay inside until the storm passes. Safe and dry." Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and herbs, the fire crackling invitingly in the hearth. Clara removed her damp shawl, shivering despite the warmth. Caleb offered a blanket, and she wrapped it around her shoulders, feeling a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. As the rain hammered against the roof, Clara's gaze met his. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition perhaps that this meeting was not mere chance. She whispered a small prayer of thanks. "Thank you for leading me here." And in that quiet cabin, two strangers, drawn together by fate and faith, would begin a journey neither could have imagined. The storm raged through the night, thrashing against the cabin walls and rattling the windows. Clara Benson sat by the fire, a steaming mug of tea warming her hands, while Caleb Turner worked quietly, mending a leaky section of the roof. She watched him for a moment, noting the way the firelight caught the lines of his strong face, softening the rough edges of a life clearly lived under hard skies. "This storm came out of nowhere," Caleb muttered, hammering a small nail into the timber. "Creeks rise faster than a man expects and people get caught." He paused, glancing at Clara. "You're lucky to have made it here in one piece." Clara smiled, a small, grateful gesture. I suppose I was. God led me here, I think." Her voice was soft but steady, full of conviction. She was used to trusting in providence, yet seeing it so clearly in her own life startled her. Caleb's lips curved into a faint smile. "I reckon he has his ways." There was something in his tone, respectful, almost reverent, that made her heart flutter. Not a romantic flutter yet, but a gentle awareness that she was not entirely alone in the world. The cabin itself was simple but well kept. A small table with 2 chairs, a stove that provided heat and the smell of lingering herbs, and a few well-worn books stacked neatly on a shelf. Clara noted the presence of a Bible, its pages dog-eared and margins filled with penciled notes. Faith ran quietly through this man's life, she realized, and that recognition gave her comfort. As the hours passed, they shared small talk to pass the time. Clara spoke of the school she taught at, of the children she loved, and the town's modest church, which often struggled to make ends meet. Caleb listened intently, asking questions that revealed his genuine interest. In turn, he spoke of his ranching life, of long days riding the hills and tending to livestock, of a younger brother he cared for after the death of their parents. There was a gentle dignity in his words, and Clara found herself leaning slightly closer across the table as she listened. At one point, the conversation shifted naturally to faith. "You must have a strong trust in God to travel in weather like this," Caleb said quietly, almost thoughtfully. "I do," Clara admitted, "though I must confess, storms like this test me. But I've learned that sometimes the test is also a blessing." She looked at him, unsure if he would understand. Caleb's eyes softened. "Maybe it's true. Some storms come to show us what, or who, we're meant to find." There was a weight behind his words, something unsaid but deeply felt, and Clara felt a strange warmth in her chest. By nightfall, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The storm outside became a gentle patter, and a sense of peace settled over the cabin. They shared a modest supper of bread and stew Caleb had prepared, speaking little but enjoying the simple comfort of shared presence. Clara found herself noticing the small kindnesses, Caleb handing her a napkin, offering the better portion of the stew, keeping the fire well tended. As the evening drew to a close, Caleb fetched a lantern and led her to a corner where she could rest. "You'll need your strength for the journey back," he said. There was an earnestness in his voice, a careful protectiveness that made her feel safe in a world that often seemed harsh. Clara settled onto the small cot, pulling the blanket snugly around her. She offered a quiet prayer of gratitude not just for shelter, but for the unexpected meeting with a man whose presence already stirred something gentle and reassuring within her. Across the cabin, Caleb returned to his work, yet she felt his eyes occasionally glance her way, a silent promise that this meeting was no accident. And so, in a cabin by the creek, two lives converged, bound by faith, circumstance, and the unspoken hope that Providence had a plan for them both. Morning came softly, the storm reduced to a gentle drizzle that turned the surrounding forest into a sparkling wonder of wet leaves and glistening cobwebs. Clara awoke to the quiet murmur of the creek outside and the faint smell of wood smoke drifting from the hearth. Caleb was already up, tending the small fire and preparing a modest breakfast of eggs and cornbread. "Good morning," he greeted her with a warm, slightly embarrassed smile. "Hope you slept well." Clara returned the smile, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Better than I expected. Thank you for your kindness." "You're welcome," he replied, a faint seriousness in his eyes. "Not many women would make it through a storm like last night on their own. You've got spirit." The compliment made her cheeks warm, and Clara felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, an awareness of his presence, solid and reassuring, that went beyond mere gratitude. She nodded, feeling the weight of the morning in a world that often seemed uncertain, yet strangely safe here. They ate together in companionable silence, the crackle of the fire and the occasional patter of rain on the roof providing a steady backdrop. After breakfast, Caleb offered to show Clara the small cabin's grounds. Outside, the forest smelled fresh and the damp earth was soft underfoot. Trees dripped with rainwater, and the air was filled with birdsong, as if the storm had cleared not just the sky but their worries as well. As they walked, Clara noticed the care with which Caleb moved, checking the garden, feeding a few chickens and attending to his horse, which had remained calm through the night. She admired his strength but also the gentleness he displayed, a careful patience that reflected both character and faith. "You've managed all this alone?" she asked, curiosity edging her words. "Mostly," Caleb replied. "My brother helps when he can, but he's still recovering. Life out here, it teaches you to be self-reliant. But it also teaches you to appreciate when someone offers help." His gaze lingered on her briefly, as if acknowledging the help she had given simply by arriving safely. Clara felt an inexplicable pull toward him, a quiet recognition that their meeting might have been more than chance. "It seems God does work in mysterious ways," she said softly, glancing toward the sun breaking through the clouds. Caleb nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Sometimes yes. You never know why he allows storms, but perhaps it's to guide people where they're meant to be." His eyes met hers, steady and sincere, and Clara's pulse quickened. They returned to the cabin, where Caleb showed her his modest library, a few well-worn books, a Bible, and a journal. Clara was impressed by the notes in the margins of scripture, evidence of a quiet life spent in reflection and faith. "Would you like to read with me?" Caleb asked, gesturing to a small chair by the fire. Clara agreed, and they spent the morning reading passages and discussing their meaning, sharing insights and exchanging thoughts on faith, morality, and hope. Each word strengthened an unspoken bond, a connection rooted not just in circumstance but in shared values and spiritual understanding. By midday the sun had fully emerged, casting golden light across the cabin and the creek. Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed, and Caleb, noticing her calm expression, allowed himself a rare smile. For the first time in years he felt that perhaps the world still held quiet miracles. As Clara prepared to continue her journey once the storm fully passed, she realized something remarkable. A simple meeting in a cabin by the creek had begun to change both their hearts. And in that moment, each silently prayed for guidance, trusting that God had brought them together for a purpose greater than either could yet see. The morning sun reflected off Willow Creek like liquid gold, and the storm from the previous night seemed a distant memory. Clara Benson wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders as she stepped outside the cabin, feeling the soft, damp earth beneath her boots. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of wet pine and fresh grass, a promise that the world had been cleansed and renewed. Caleb Turner was already waiting, holding the reins of Daisy and leading his horse alongside her. "The trail should be safe now," he said, his voice steady and calm, a quiet confidence she found reassuring. "I'll ride with you as far as the fork. It's better than traveling alone after last night." Clara nodded, grateful for the company and the subtle courage his presence inspired. As they walked along the creek, she noticed the way Caleb moved, deliberate and careful, eyes constantly scanning the path ahead. There was a strength in him, tempered with gentleness, a balance that made her heart beat a little faster, even as she reminded herself to keep her feelings in check. "You've got a remarkable way with this land," Clara said softly, glancing at the rolling hills and the careful fences marking his property. "It looks like you've poured a lot of care into it." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "I have. Takes work to keep the ranch running. It's not easy, but I try to do right by it, and by my brother." His gaze softened as he spoke, and Clara sensed the weight of responsibility he carried. They walked in silence for a few moments, the sound of the creek flowing over rocks filling the space between words. Then, without warning, a sudden slip on a muddy patch caused Clara to stumble dangerously close to the water's edge. Caleb reacted instantly, his strong hands gripping her waist and steadying her before she could fall. "Careful," he said, his voice a low rumble laced with concern. His chest was close to hers, and for a heartbeat, Clara felt the warmth of his presence seep into her very being. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up into his deep brown eyes. There was an intensity there, a mixture of protection and something more, a hint of longing she could not yet name. "You're welcome," Caleb replied quietly, letting go but keeping his gaze fixed on her. "The creek can be dangerous when it swells, even after a storm." They continued walking, but the near accident had shifted something unspoken between them. Clara felt her heart lighter and yet more aware of him, of the way his presence made the world feel safer, more certain. As they reached a flat area by the creek, Caleb stopped. He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water, then handed another to Clara. Hesitant at first, she copied him, and they laughed softly as their stones danced across the surface. For a brief moment, the tension of the past days, the fear of storms, and the weight of the world seemed to vanish. "It's strange," Clara said, turning to him. "A single storm brought me here, and now it feels like I was meant to be here." Caleb met her gaze, and for the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he'd been avoiding. "Maybe it was. Some things, some people, are placed in our lives for reasons we don't understand until later." Clara nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, a gentle certainty that Providence had indeed guided her path to Caleb's cabin. The creek flowed steadily beside them, a quiet witness to their growing connection. And in that moment, as sunlight danced on the water, two hearts, one cautious, one scarred by responsibility, began to recognize that their meeting was no mere chance. As they turned back toward the cabin, Clara felt a stirring of hope, a budding trust that this journey, though unexpected, might lead to something lasting and true, guided by faith, courage, and the mysterious hand of God. By the time Clara Benson and Caleb Turner reached the outskirts of Willow Creek town, the sun had fully pierced the morning mist, illuminating wooden storefronts, hitching posts, and dusty streets bustling with townsfolk. Children ran along the sidewalks, their laughter mingling with the calls of merchants selling produce and wares. It was a scene of simple life, yet Clara felt a twinge of apprehension. Townspeople could be curious, sometimes unkind, and news of strangers, or unexpected guests, traveled fast. Caleb led Daisy and his own horse down the main street. "You'll be safe enough here," he said, keeping a careful watch. "But folks will talk. It's a small town. They notice everything." Clara nodded, swallowing her nerves. She had lived in small communities before, but being recognized in the midst of a storm-induced arrival was something entirely new. "I trust God will guide me," she replied softly, the words carrying both conviction and hope. The first curious glances came almost immediately. Merchants and passers-by paused mid-task to stare, whispering as they exchanged pointed looks. Clara caught snippets. "Isn't that the schoolteacher from the northern ridge? Who's that man with her? Storm must have brought her here." Her cheeks flushed, but she kept her composure. Caleb, sensing her unease, gave a reassuring squeeze on her shoulder. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They don't matter. Not if you know who you are." They stopped at the small church to deliver the supplies Clara had carried through the storm. The pastor, Reverend Whitaker, welcomed her with a warm smile, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Miss Benson, your timing is miraculous. The children have been needing new lessons and candles. And these supplies, thank you truly." Clara's nerves eased slightly as she handed over the items, but she could feel the subtle tension in the room. Caleb remained by the door, standing tall, aware of the curious glances from townsfolk who recognized him as a rancher with a checkered past. Some whispered doubts about his character, others mere curiosity, but the scrutiny was palpable. "People will talk," Caleb muttered when they were alone outside the church. "They think they know you, or me, without ever understanding. You've got to let God handle their judgments." Clara nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude for his wisdom. "I suppose he does have a plan," she said. "Even if it's difficult to see sometimes." Their afternoon was spent helping Reverend Whitaker organize the schoolroom and distributing supplies. As they worked side by side, Clara noticed the subtle ways Caleb's attention returned to her. A hand resting briefly on hers while passing a book, a glance of concern when a child tripped nearby, a quiet word of encouragement. Each gesture was small, yet they left her heart fluttering in ways she had not expected. By the time the sun began to dip behind the hills, they had finished their tasks. But the whispers from townsfolk had not ceased. Clara overheard a mother muttering, "That Turner boy keeps showing up with the teacher. Storm or not, it seems more than chance." The words brought a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. Caleb noticed her tension and offered a comforting smile. "Let them talk," he said firmly. "Faith is stronger than gossip, and what God has set in motion cannot be undone by whispers." Clara felt the truth of his words, letting a small sense of peace wash over her. The storm had brought her to Caleb, and their meeting, though noticed by all, was guided by something far greater than mere chance. And as they rode back toward the cabin at dusk, the light catching the creek in golden brilliance, Clara realized that her heart had begun to open, not just to Caleb but to the unfolding plan God had for her life. The morning air was crisp as Clara Benson and Caleb Turner returned to Willow Creek, this time with a sense of purpose beyond mere survival or shelter. The previous day's storm had left the town glistening, and the streets buzzed with activity. Clara carried a renewed sense of confidence, while Caleb's steady presence beside her made the world feel safer, more certain. Reverend Whitaker welcomed them both warmly. "Miss Benson, Caleb, you've done so much already. The children are eager for your lessons, and the church, well, it could use your hands today." Clara smiled, feeling a mix of humility and excitement. She loved teaching, and the opportunity to share faith with young minds always filled her heart. Caleb, meanwhile, understood the value of hard work and community service, and he quickly set about helping repair the church's wooden fence and clearing debris from the yard. Working together, they found an easy rhythm. Clara tended to the children inside, reading from scripture and leading them in simple lessons on kindness, honesty, and faith. Caleb moved steadily outside, repairing fences, reinforcing beams, and occasionally helping the children with small tasks. From time to time, their eyes met across the courtyard, and a silent understanding passed between them, a shared commitment to purpose, to service, and slowly to each other. During a brief pause, Clara stepped outside to water a small garden near the church. Caleb joined her, carrying buckets of water. "You've got away with this," he said, glancing at the neat rows of vegetables and flowers. "It's clear you care for more than just lessons and sermons." Clara laughed softly. "I suppose that's true. There's something comforting about seeing things grow under your care, something that reminds you faith can bear fruit in every part of life." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen that too. Tending the land, raising animals, caring for family, it teaches patience, trust, and hope. Sometimes, it even teaches forgiveness." His eyes met hers, steady and intense, and she felt her chest tighten in a way she could not yet name. As the morning gave way to afternoon, Caleb helped the children gather firewood for the church stove, while Clara organized supplies for Sunday lessons. Their teamwork extended beyond physical labor. It was a blending of hearts and spirits, each learning from the other's patience, faith, and quiet strength. Clara noticed the way Caleb's hands moved with care, even in the simplest tasks, and felt a growing admiration. He, in turn, observed the kindness in her eyes, the gentle authority with which she guided the children, and felt an unfamiliar warmth stir within him. During a brief break, they sat together beneath a large oak, sharing a simple meal of bread and cheese. Clara spoke of her childhood, her faith, and her dreams of helping those in need. Caleb listened, sharing small details of his life, the hardships of ranching, and the burden of caring for his brother. Through each conversation they found common ground, not just in practical matters but in shared belief, values, and hope. "You know," Caleb said quietly, "I didn't expect the storm to bring me anything more than trouble. But seeing you here, helping, teaching, caring, it's a reminder that sometimes God uses even the harshest weather to guide us to what matters most." Clara's heart fluttered at the words. I feel the same way, she admitted, her voice soft but sincere. It's as if every step, even the difficult ones, led me here. As the day drew to a close and the children waved goodbye, Clara and Caleb walked back toward the cabin, side by side, hearts quietly intertwined. The work had strengthened not just their connection to the town but to each other. And in that quiet evening light, both felt a profound truth. Their meeting had been no accident, and what had begun as a chance encounter was blossoming into a partnership of faith, hope, and perhaps, love. The sun dipped low over Willow Creek, painting the wooden rooftops in shades of amber and gold. Clara Benson walked alongside Caleb Turner toward the cabin, her thoughts heavy despite the calm beauty of the evening. The town had whispered enough that day to leave her unsettled. Rumors about Caleb's past had begun to surface, casting shadows over the growing trust and affection between them. You seem distracted, Caleb observed, his voice gentle but concerned. He slowed his pace to match hers, his hand brushing lightly against hers. Clara felt a small thrill but quickly reminded herself to focus. It's the townsfolk, she admitted, lowering her gaze. They speak of your past, your mistakes. I don't want it to affect what we've built, even in these short days. Caleb sighed, his broad shoulders sagging slightly under the weight of unspoken regrets. I can't change what I've done, Clara. The things I did before I took care of my brother, before I tried to make amends, they follow me. Small towns remember everything. She stopped, turning to look at him. But you've changed. You've shown me kindness, patience, faith. Everything in your life now is proof of that. Her eyes searched his, trying to convey what words could not fully express. He swallowed hard, his gaze distant. I've spent years trying to forgive myself, to live a life worth something. Yet even now the shadows of past mistakes, they linger. I don't want them to taint you. Clara reached for his hand, gripping it firmly. We all have pasts, Caleb. But faith teaches us that redemption is possible, that God's grace can guide even the lost. I see the man you are now, and that is the man I trust. For a moment, silence fell, filled only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird settling in for the night. Then, without warning, a commotion erupted ahead. A group of townsfolk had gathered near the general store, pointing and whispering loudly. One man stepped forward, his voice sharp and accusatory. That's Caleb Turner, he called. Thought the town had forgotten the trouble he caused years ago. And now he's cozy with the schoolteacher? Clara felt a flash of anger on Caleb's behalf but also a surge of protective resolve. She stepped closer to him, her hand on his arm. Ignore them, she urged. Their judgment does not define us. Caleb nodded, though the tension in his jaw was clear. Easier said than done, he murmured, though there was a spark of pride in his eyes at her courage. Come on, let's not give them more fuel. They continued down the street, heads held high, and Clara felt the warmth of his hand finding hers again. Though whispers followed them, their bond remained unbroken, strengthened by shared trials and faith in something greater than gossip or human judgment. Back at the cabin, as twilight settled over the hills, Caleb finally spoke with the honesty he had been avoiding. I've been afraid, he admitted, that my past would drive everyone away, that I'd never find someone who could see beyond it. Clara looked into his eyes, her own steady with certainty. God brought us together for a reason. Your past, it doesn't scare me. I believe in the man you are today. And in the man you're becoming. For the first time in years, Caleb allowed himself a true, unguarded smile. The shadows of his past still lingered, but with Clara by his side and with faith guiding their path, he felt hope for the future. Hope that love and redemption could flourish even in the harshest of western towns. As they settled in for the evening, the firelight casting warm reflections across the cabin walls, both understood that the storm outside had been nothing compared to the trials that tested their hearts. Yet through faith, courage, and trust in each other, they had begun to overcome those trials. One step, one prayer, and one shared glance at a time. The cabin was quiet that evening, the last rays of sun fading behind the distant hills. A soft fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow that danced across the wooden walls. Clara Benson sat near the window, a worn Bible open in her lap, while Caleb Turner moved about, tending to chores with his usual steady efficiency. The day's labors in town had left both of them weary, but there was a shared sense of contentment that filled the space between them. Clara, Caleb said, breaking the silence, would you read with me for a while? His voice was low, hesitant, almost shy, though the intensity in his gaze betrayed the depth of his need for connection. Clara smiled softly, rising to join him by the fire. Of course, she said, taking her place beside him on the small wooden bench. She felt a flutter in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth at being this close, sharing something so personal and sacred. Caleb opened the Bible to the Psalms, and together they read passages about hope, mercy, and redemption. As Clara's voice filled the room, she noticed Caleb listening with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. When he spoke, he shared reflections on the verses, revealing not only his knowledge but the honesty of a man who had lived through struggle and was striving to be better. "Clara," he said softly after a pause, "I've never had anyone who understood me like this, who saw me for more than my mistakes." She turned to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I don't see a man defined by mistakes, Caleb. I see someone striving, someone caring, someone guided by faith. That is who you are now, and that is who I choose to see." His hand hovered near hers for a heartbeat before resting gently atop it. The touch sent an unexpected thrill through Clara, though it was tempered by the reverence of the moment, the firelight, the quiet, the sacredness of their shared faith. "I've been afraid," Caleb admitted, voice barely above a whisper, "that I'd never find someone who could look past the shadows of my past, someone who could trust me, someone who could love me." His eyes, dark and earnest, searched hers for understanding, for affirmation, for hope. Clara's heart ached with empathy and something more profound. "Faith teaches us that redemption is possible, Caleb. And love often finds us when we least expect it, guiding us through trials, forgiving what we cannot forget and giving us strength." She squeezed his hand lightly, a promise unspoken but deeply felt. For a long while they sat together, reading and reflecting in silence, the crackle of the fire the only sound in the cozy cabin. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, Caleb leaned slightly closer. Clara's breath caught, but she did not move away. There was no rush, no urgency, only the quiet acknowledgement of something growing, tender and sacred between them. Finally, Caleb spoke again, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Clara, I don't want this, what's happening between us, to be fleeting. I want to trust it, nurture it, guided by what is right. Guided by faith." Clara nodded, a smile spreading across her face, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "Then we will," she said softly. "Together, with God leading us, we can face whatever comes." As the night deepened, the two sat close, hands intertwined, hearts quietly aligned. The trials of the past, the whispers of the town, the shadows of mistakes, all faded in the warmth of faith, understanding, and the beginning of a love that neither had expected, yet both knew had been guided by providence. In the quiet of the cabin, under the watchful eye of the stars beyond the window, Clara and Caleb discovered a truth both simple and profound. Some meetings are not mere chance, they are the work of a higher hand, guiding hearts to find one another, and in that finding discovering the courage to love, to trust, and to hope. The morning light filtered softly through the cabin windows, but the tranquility was deceptive. Willow Creek, usually a quiet town, seemed charged with tension. Rumors of Caleb Turner's past were still circulating, now joined by whispers of his growing closeness to Clara Benson. The small community, protective and cautious, watched them with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, testing the strength of what had begun in the cabin by the creek. Clara felt the weight of eyes upon her as she walked through town, her basket of supplies in hand. The children waved as usual, innocent and trusting, but even their mothers cast fleeting glances of caution. Caleb was beside her, steady and unwavering, his presence a silent shield. Yet she could sense his own unease. Even a man of his strength and resolve could feel the sting of judgment when it was directed at someone he cared for. As they passed the general store, a shout rang out. "Caleb Turner. You think you can come into our town and act as if the past doesn't matter?" Clara froze, her heart pounding, and Caleb's jaw tightened. The man who had shouted was known for stirring trouble, but his words carried enough weight to make even the strongest pause. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and the man. "I've done what I can to make amends," he said firmly, his voice steady but filled with restrained emotion. "I've worked hard, cared for my brother, and served this community where I could. The past is behind me, and it is God who will judge the heart, not the gossip of men." The man sneered but found no easy answer, and muttering under his breath, he turned away. Clara exhaled slowly, grateful for Caleb's courage but shaken by the confrontation. She placed a hand on his arm, feeling the strength beneath her fingers. "That was intense," she murmured, her eyes searching his. Caleb's gaze softened as he looked at her. "It's the way of the world sometimes. But I trust you, and I trust God to guide us through what comes next." The day's trials continued as they helped Reverend Whitaker repair a portion of the church roof damaged by the previous storm. Working side by side, they leaned on each other, not just physically but emotionally. Clara noticed Caleb's quiet patience, the way he guided her when lifting beams or handling tools, never letting her feel inadequate, always steady, always present. During a break, they sat beneath a large oak, the sun warming their faces. Clara leaned slightly toward Caleb, her hand brushing against his. "Even in the midst of trials I feel peace," she said softly. "It's like God is reminding me that we are exactly where we're meant to be." Caleb reached out, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Faith is our anchor," he said. "And as long as we hold on to it, and to each other, no trial can break what God has set in motion." That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Clara and Caleb returned to the cabin. The town's whispers had not ceased entirely, but their hearts were aligned, fortified by shared trust, love, and faith. They knelt together in prayer before the fire, voices soft yet firm, asking for guidance, strength, and protection. In that moment, they understood a profound truth. Life in the frontier was fraught with challenges and people's opinions could wound, but love guided by faith was unshakable. The trials they faced were not meant to drive them apart, but to test the depth of their hearts and the strength of their trust in each other, and in God's plan. As night fell over Willow Creek, two hearts beat with quiet certainty. The path before them was uncertain, yes, but it was also blessed, guided, and undeniably theirs to walk together. The morning sun rose over Willow Creek in a golden blaze, painting the town in soft light. Birds sang from the treetops, and the scent of fresh bread from the bakery mingled with the earthy aroma of the creek. Clara Benson walked beside Caleb Turner, her heart light despite the recent trials. The whispers, the townsfolk's curiosity, even the shadows of Caleb's past, all had been met with courage, patience, and faith. As they approached the church, the small town seemed to sense the significance of the day. Children ran to greet them, laughter filling the air, while adults paused to nod respectfully. It was the first time Clara noticed genuine smiles alongside the cautious glances, a quiet acceptance that the pair's integrity and faith had begun to win hearts. Inside the church, Reverend Whitaker waited, hands folded over his Bible, his eyes reflecting warmth and pride. "Today," he said, "we celebrate more than just the work you've done here. We celebrate trust, faith, and the guidance of God in bringing two hearts together." Caleb glanced at Clara, his expression a mix of awe and tenderness. Clara returned the look, feeling the quiet certainty of a connection forged through storms, trials, and shared devotion. Their hands met, fingers intertwining naturally, a silent promise that had been built over days of courage, prayer, and understanding. "Clara," Caleb began, his voice steady, filled with emotion. "From the moment I saw you at my cabin by the creek, I felt something I couldn't explain. I was lost in many ways, haunted by my past, yet God placed you in my path. You've taught me patience, hope, and the courage to love again. I can't imagine a life without you by my side." Clara's eyes glistened as she responded, "Caleb, you've shown me strength, faith, and a heart willing to grow. Even amidst the trials, I see God's hand guiding us, and I believe He brought us together for a reason. I choose to walk this path with you, trusting Him, trusting us." The congregation watched in gentle silence, witnessing a love that had blossomed not through chance alone, but through faith, perseverance, and divine guidance. Reverend Whitaker spoke a quiet blessing, reminding them that love rooted in trust and God's plan was unshakable. Later, outside the church, the town gathered to see them. Children offered wildflowers, and neighbors nodded with newfound respect. Caleb and Clara shared a quiet moment, looking out at the creek that had first brought them together. The waters reflected the sunlight like a promise, an eternal reminder that even storms could bring blessing. "I never imagined a storm could lead to something so perfect," Clara said softly. Caleb squeezed her hand, eyes reflecting the same light she saw in the creek. "Sometimes the trials we face are simply the path God prepares to guide us to what truly matters. You were my blessing, Clara, and now I see that every step, every storm, every shadow, led me to you." As they walked back toward the cabin, side by side, hands entwined and hearts full, both felt a profound peace. Love, trust, and faith had triumphed. Their journey, one begun with a storm and a chance meeting, had revealed a higher purpose, a shared life guided by providence. Under the wide western sky, with the creek whispering gently nearby and the town behind them embracing their happiness, Clara and Caleb knew this was only the beginning. They had found each other through faith, and together, they would face the future, anchored by love, trust, and God's guiding hand. And so, the storm that had brought them together became a symbol, A reminder that even the most unexpected encounters are sometimes miracles waiting to be discovered.